Jax Corvus straightened his light gray beige shirt as he reorganized the ancient Terra section of the Stellar Cultural Archives repository. The orbital station's artificial gravity felt particularly heavy today, or maybe it was just the weight of maintaining order amongst the countless texts from dozens of species. His long umber hair, tied back in a casual knot, swayed as he moved between the shelves. The archive was unusually quiet this morning, with only the soft hum of the station's life support systems breaking the silence. That's when he heard the door slide open with a gentle whoosh, followed by graceful footsteps that seemed to dance across the polished floor. Looking up from his work, Jax found himself momentarily stunned. A tall, elegant humanoid woman with striking cyan skin stood before him, her ebon hair cascading over her shoulders in gentle waves. Her dark cyan gown, adorned with intricate silver embroidery, seemed to capture and reflect the archive's soft lighting. "Welcome to the Terra Cultural section," Jax said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of an experienced archivist. "I'm Jax Corvus, the lead researcher here." The alien woman's argent eyes studied him with undisguised curiosity. "I am Lyra Naris, cultural attaché from the Azure Worlds," she replied, her voice carrying a melodic quality that seemed to resonate with the archive's peaceful atmosphere. "I've been tasked with studying Terran customs and peculiarities." Jax noticed her gaze drift to a particular shelf where an old synth-bound volume sat somewhat conspicuously among its more modern companions. The book's worn spine bore the title, "The Complete Guide to Terran Pair Bonding and Reproduction, a Scientific Approach." "What's this?" Lyra asked, reaching for the book with elegant cyan fingers. "Your species actually documents such intimate matters." Jax felt heat rise to his cheeks, but maintained his professional composure. "Yes, we Terrans tend to study and document everything systematically, including aspects of life that other species might consider private." Lyra's melodic laugh filled the archive. "How utterly fascinating. In my culture, such matters are purely instinctual. We would never think to write instruction manuals about them." She opened the book, her argent eyes widening at the detailed diagrams within. "By the stellar winds. You Terrans are thorough." "Well," Jax cleared his throat, "Terran relationships are complex. We believe understanding leads to better." He paused, searching for the right word. "Outcomes." Lyra raised an elegantly arched eyebrow, her lips curving into an amused smile. "You make it sound like a scientific experiment." "Sometimes it feels that way," Jax admitted, finding himself drawn into her playful banter, "though I assure you, we're capable of being quite spontaneous." "Are you now?" Lyra's voice carried a hint of challenge. "Perhaps you could elaborate on these Terran peculiarities, for research purposes, of course." Jax felt his professional demeanor slipping as he met her argent gaze. "That might require multiple study sessions." "I have time," she replied, settling into one of the archive's comfortable chairs, "and a very curious mind." As Jax began explaining Terran courtship customs, he couldn't help but notice how Lyra leaned forward, genuinely interested in his every word. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by her occasional surprised exclamations and his increasingly relaxed laughter. What started as a simple cultural exchange was quickly evolving into something more intriguing. The way she looked at him, with that mixture of fascination and amusement, made him wonder if perhaps she was studying more than just Terran customs. The following day saw Lyra returning to the archive with increasing frequency. Each visit brought new questions, deeper discussions, and an undeniable strengthening of the connection between them. Jax found himself looking forward to the soft whoosh of the door that heralded her arrival, the subtle fragrance of exotic star lilies that accompanied her presence. "Your species is fascinating," Lyra declared one afternoon, perched on the edge of his desk while examining another Terran text. "You document everything with such passion, even the most basic biological functions become elaborate rituals." Jax leaned back in his chair, admiring how the station lighting played across her cyan skin. "We believe that understanding enhances experience. Knowledge doesn't diminish the magic, it adds layers of appreciation." "Layers?" Lyra's argent eyes sparkled with mischief. "Like your curious Terran habit of wearing multiple pieces of clothing? Such an inefficient practice." "Says the woman in the elaborate gown," Jax countered, gesturing to her stunning attire. "Ah, but this serves a diplomatic purpose. Your clothing seems designed specifically to be removed piece by piece, like unwrapping a gift." She paused, watching his reaction. "Another peculiarly Terran trait, making everything into an art form. Jax felt his pulse quicken at her direct approach. Your people don't appreciate anticipation? We appreciate efficiency, Lyra replied, closing the book she held. When we desire something, we simply pursue it. No elaborate courtship rituals, no complex social dynamic. She slid gracefully from the desk, moving closer to him. Though I must admit, your Terran ways are intriguing. And what intrigues you most? Jax asked, maintaining his composure despite her proximity. The contradiction, she answered, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You create detailed manuals about intimate matters, yet you blush when discussing them. You build vast archives of knowledge about pleasure, yet treat it with such reverence. Your species turns simple biological imperatives into poetry. Jax stood, bringing himself eye level with her. Perhaps because we believe some things are worth taking time to appreciate fully, like cultural exchange. Lyra's lips curved into a knowing smile. Exactly, like cultural exchange, she agreed, matching his playful tone. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask about your world's literature. Do you have any texts about relationships? Lyra laughed, the sound like crystal chimes in the quiet archive. Our relationship guides would disappoint you, Jax. They're primarily biological charts and success rate statistics. No romance, no poetry, no manual of techniques. Maybe that's why you find our approach so fascinating? Maybe, she admitted, trailing her fingers along the spine of another book. Or maybe it's the teacher more than the subject matter. Their conversations had grown increasingly charged with unspoken possibilities. Jax found himself captivated not just by her beauty, but by her brilliant mind and direct nature. She approached every topic with genuine curiosity, even those that made him momentarily uncomfortable. Tell me, she said one evening, as the station's day cycle was winding down, in all these Terran books about relationships, what's the most important lesson? Jax considered the question carefully. That connection transcends physical attraction, that true intimacy involves mind and spirit as much as body. How very Terran, Lyra mused, but her tone held admiration rather than mockery. My people would say that's needlessly complicated. And what would you say? She met his gaze steadily. I would say I'm beginning to understand the appeal of complication. Their intellectual discussions often veered into philosophical territory. Lyra was particularly fascinated by Terran concepts of romance and partnership, so different from her species' pragmatic approach to relationships. In my culture, she explained during one of their late evening talks, relationships are formed based on genetic compatibility and social advantage. The idea of choosing a partner based on emotional connection is considered primitive. And what do you think about that now? Jax asked, noting how she'd gradually moved closer throughout their conversation. I think, she replied thoughtfully, that Terrans might be primitive in the most fascinating ways. Your emotions make you unpredictable, yet that very unpredictability leads to incredible achievements. You turn basic biological functions into art, simple actions into rituals of meaning. Their discussions often lasted until the station's night cycle began, the archive's automatic lighting dimming to a soft glow that made everything feel more intimate. Jax found himself sharing stories about Terra's various cultures and their different approaches to relationships, while Lyra offered insights into her own world's customs. We have no concept of dating, she admitted one evening. The very idea of spending time together simply to explore compatibility would be considered wasteful. And now? Jax asked, aware of how their own daily meetings might be classified under her culture's efficiency-focused worldview. Lyra's argent eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. Now, I find myself questioning many things I once took for granted. Your Terran ways are infectious. The orbital station's annual interstellar cultural festival transformed the usually sterile corridors into a vibrant tapestry of alien traditions. Holographic displays shimmered alongside traditional decorations from dozens of worlds, while the air filled with exotic aromas from various species' ceremonial incense and traditional cuisines. Jax's archive had been designated as the Terran Cultural Center for the festival, much to his mixed delight and consternation. He'd arranged displays highlighting Terra's artistic achievements, technological innovations, and cultural evolution, but the section drawing the most attention was, predictably, the Relationship Studies collection. Your exhibition is causing quite a stir, Lyra's familiar voice carried a note of amusement as she approached his desk. She wore a more elaborate version of her usual attire, her diplomatic status emphasized by additional silver accessories that caught the light with every movement. Ambassador Thrax has expressed concerns about the nature of your daily visits, she added, her argent eyes meeting his with a hint of defiance. Apparently, some believe I'm becoming too fascinated by Terran customs. Are you? Jax asked, noting how she'd positioned herself closer than diplomatic protocol typically allowed. Perhaps, she admitted, trailing her fingers along the edge of his desk, though I'd argue I'm not fascinated enough. Your Festivalpräsentation barely scratches the surface of Terran complexity. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of stiff-looking aliens from Lyra's world. The ambassador himself, a tall, imposing figure with darker cyan skin, regarded their proximity with obvious disapproval. Cultural attaché Neris, his tone carried a subtle warning. The Relian delegation awaits your expertise. Of course, Ambassador, Lyra responded smoothly, but her eyes held Jax's for a moment longer than necessary. Though I believe attending the evening's Terran cultural demonstration would be equally valuable for our diplomatic mission. The ambassador's expression tightened. The Terrans' unusual approaches to pair bonding are well documented in their texts. Further practical study seems unnecessary. With respect, Ambassador, Lyra countered, her diplomatic training evident in her measured tone, texts alone cannot convey the full complexity of Terran cultural practices. Their approach to relationships has produced fascinating societal innovations. Jax watched this exchange with growing admiration for Lyra's skilled navigation of the diplomatic minefield, as she managed to frame her interest in Terran culture as purely academic while subtly asserting her autonomy in choosing which cultural aspects to study. The festival's evening program included a traditional Terra dance demonstration. Jax found himself constantly aware of Lyra's presence among the diplomatic observers, her argent eyes following his movements as he explained the historical significance of various dance styles in Terran culture. As you can see, he addressed the assembled dignitaries, dance evolved beyond mere entertainment into a complex form of nonverbal communication, particularly in matters of courtship. Fascinating, Ambassador Thrax commented dryly. Your species turns even the simplest biological imperatives into unnecessarily elaborate rituals. Perhaps, Jax replied, meeting Lyra's gaze across the room, but these rituals have led to some of our greatest artistic and cultural achievements. Later that evening, as the festival's activities wound down, Lyra managed to find a moment alone with Jax in a quiet corner of the archive. The station's lighting had shifted to evening mode, casting everything in a warm, intimate glow. Your people's obsession with ceremony and ritual used to puzzle me, she confessed, standing close enough that he could detect the subtle shimmer of her skin, but I'm beginning to understand the appeal of taking time to appreciate things properly. Their proximity sent electric currents through Jax's body, his Terran physiology responding to her alien allure in ways that transcended species barriers. The tension between them had built to an almost unbearable level, charged with unspoken desires and cultural taboos. Your superiors seem concerned about your research methods, Jax observed, his voice low and intimate. They believe I'm becoming too personally invested in understanding Terran customs, Lyra replied, her argent eyes darkening with emotion. Perhaps they're right. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then, with deliberate slowness, Lyra reached for one of the relationship texts that had started their unlikely connection. I believe, she said, her voice carrying a hint of mischief, that I require a more practical understanding of these Terran customs you've been teaching me about. Their eventual coming together was both inevitable and revolutionary, a merger of species and cultures that defied conventional wisdom about biological compatibility. What followed was a discovery that transcended mere physical union, becoming instead a profound exploration of how two different species could bridge the gap between their worlds. The aftermath found them in Jax's private quarters, the station's artificial night cycle providing a cocoon of privacy around their transgression of diplomatic protocols and cultural boundaries. Your texts, Lyra murmured, her cyan skin glowing with a subtle phosphorescence that Jax now knew indicated contentment, didn't do justice to the complexity of Terran intimacy. Something that can't be properly conveyed through academic study, I suppose, Jax replied, tracing patterns on her arm. Indeed, she agreed, her expression turning thoughtful, though I suspect my diplomatic reports on Terran mating customs will need significant revision. Their shared laughter was interrupted by an urgent message on Lyra's diplomatic communicator. Ambassador Thrax requested her immediate presence for an emergency meeting. They know, she said simply, her professional demeanor returning even as her eyes held lingering warmth. The question is, what will they do about it? Are you concerned? Jax asked, watching her gracefully reassemble her diplomatic attire. About their reaction? No. About the implications. She paused, considering. Terrans aren't the only ones who can appreciate the value of following one's heart, even if we don't typically admit to having them. Before departing, she turned back to him with a slight smile. Your species' strange obsession with documenting and studying reproduction led me to you. Perhaps there's wisdom in your peculiar ways after all. The station's medical bay hummed with activity as Dr. Richard Johnson studied the holographic display with increasing fascination. Lyra sat calmly on the examination table, her diplomatic poise intact despite the circumstances, while Jax paced nervously nearby. This is remarkable, Dr. Johnson muttered, adjusting his spectacles. By all conventional wisdom, your species shouldn't be biologically compatible for reproduction. Yet these readings. Lyra's hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, where the scanner had detected something unprecedented. Perhaps your Terran texts on reproduction require updating, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Jax stopped pacing and moved to her side, their fingers intertwining naturally. Are they healthy? Perfectly healthy, as far as I can tell, Dr. Johnson replied, his excitement barely contained, though I'd like to consult with some specialists from both species. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies genetics. The news spread through diplomatic channels faster than a quantum transmission. Within hours, Ambassador Thrax arrived at the medical bay, his usual composure slightly ruffled. This is unprecedented, he declared, studying the medical displays with intense interest. Our species has attempted crossbreeding with compatible races for centuries, without success. Yet Terrans, with their primitive approach to reproduction. Perhaps that's precisely why it worked, Lyra interrupted, her argent eyes meeting Jax's with warmth. Terrans don't approach reproduction as a mere biological function. They invest it with meaning, with emotion, with love, Jax finished softly, earning a disapproving glance from the ambassador. A quaint notion, Thrax responded dryly, though I must admit, the results are intriguing. Our scientists will want to study this development extensively. With all due respect, Ambassador, Jax spoke up, his protective instincts rising, Lyra isn't a research subject. She's a person, carrying our child. The word child seemed to echo in the medical bay, carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. For Terrans, it represented family, future, hope. For the Azure Worlders, it suggested biological success, evolutionary advancement. Of course, Thrax conceded, though his tone suggested the matter wasn't settled, cultural attaché Neris' condition will be treated with appropriate discretion. After the ambassador departed, Dr. Johnson gave them privacy to process the news. Lyra's usual composure softened as she turned to Jax. Your Terran books never mention this possibility, she said, her voice carrying a mix of wonder and amusement. All those detailed manuals on technique, yet nothing about potential consequences. Jax laughed, the tension breaking slightly. I suppose some things are beyond even Terran documentation. My people will want to study this extensively, Lyra mused, her diplomatic mind already working through the implications. The first viable Terran-Azure world hybrid, conceived through traditional means, no less. It rather validates your species' approach to reproduction, doesn't it? Is that what you're thinking about right now? Jax asked, studying her expression carefully. No, she admitted, her hand still resting on her abdomen. I'm thinking about how Terrans might be right about another thing, the importance of emotional connection in creating new life. Their moment was interrupted by Dr. Johnson's return, accompanied by a team of specialists from both species. The following hours were filled with examinations, questions, and barely contained scientific excitement. The fetus appears to have inherited the best traits from both species, one Azure World scientist observed, her professional detachment slipping slightly. Terran adaptability combined with our species' enhanced cellular regeneration. The implications are extraordinary. And to think, Lyra commented dryly, it all started with a book about proper reproduction techniques. Terrans truly are strange, documenting everything so thoroughly, yet still managing to surprise us. Later, in the privacy of Jax's quarters, they discussed their future. The station's artificial night cycle cast soft shadows around them as they lay together, contemplating the changes ahead. My superiors are simultaneously scandalized and fascinated, Lyra revealed, her skin glowing with that particular phosphorescence that Jax now recognized as contentment. They can't decide whether to celebrate this breakthrough or hide it from public knowledge. And what do you want? Jax asked, tracing patterns on her arm. I want to understand how your species' obsession with documenting and studying reproduction led to something our most advanced genetic engineers couldn't achieve, she replied thoughtfully. I want to explore this connection between emotion and biology that Terrans seem to understand instinctively. That sounds like a long-term research project, Jax observed, smiling. Indeed, Lyra agreed, her argent eyes sparkling with mischief. I believe I'll need to conduct extensive practical studies, for scientific purposes, of course. Of course, Jax echoed, pulling her closer. Anything for science. The Azure World Science Council's temporary laboratory on the station buzzed with activity. Holographic displays showed detailed genetic sequences, while scientists debated in their characteristic analytical tones. In the center of this controlled chaos, Lyra sat regally on an examination chair, her diplomatic training evident in her composed demeanor despite the invasive attention. Fascinating how the Terran genetic material has integrated so seamlessly, Chief Researcher Mara commented, adjusting another scanner. Their primitive reproductive methods shouldn't have achieved this level of success. Jax, standing protectively nearby, bristled at the word primitive. Those methods created something your advanced techniques couldn't, he pointed out, earning several disapproving glances from the assembled scientists. Indeed, Lyra interjected smoothly, her argent eyes twinkling with amusement. Perhaps there's something to be said for Terran enthusiasm in these matters. The chief researcher's skin darkened slightly, the Azure World equivalent of a blush. We've prepared a detailed schedule for monitoring the fetus's development. You'll need to report here 3 times daily for examination. Absolutely not, Jack stepped forward, his voice firm. Lyra isn't a laboratory specimen. The Terran has a point, Ambassador Thrax's voice cut through the tension as he entered the lab. Cultural attaché Neris's diplomatic status requires more discretion in our research methods. The ambassador's presence shifted the dynamic in the room. Though he'd initially opposed their relationship, the unprecedented success of their genetic compatibility had apparently altered his perspective, at least officially. We propose a compromise, he continued. Daily examinations, but conducted in your quarters, with a focus on both the medical and cultural aspects of this unique situation. Lyra raised an elegant eyebrow. Cultural aspects. Indeed. Your condition provides an opportunity to study Terran approaches to reproduction and child-rearing. Their peculiar emphasis on emotional bonding during gestation might have contributed to your successful conception. Later, in their newly shared quarters, a diplomatic concession that had raised eyebrows throughout the station, Lyra laughed about the situation. They're trying to quantify love, she mused, watching Jax arrange his collection of Terran literature on their shelves. They want to understand how Terran emotions might influence genetic compatibility. And what do you think? Jax asked, placing their original meeting's catalyst, the reproduction manual, in a prominent position. I think, she replied, her skin glowing with that special phosphorescence that now appeared whenever they were alone, that some things can't be measured in a laboratory. The way Terrans approach intimacy, the importance you place on emotional connection, it's more than just biological functions. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Johnson, carrying what appeared to be ancient paper books. I thought you might find these interesting, he said, placing them carefully on a table. Historical records of Terran pregnancy customs and traditions. Lyra's eyes lit up with curiosity, a reaction that still amazed Jax, considering her species' usually clinical approach to such matters. She opened one book, then laughed. More manuals? Terrans really do document everything. These are different, Dr. Johnson explained. They are not just about biological process, but the emotional journey. Human cultures have always viewed pregnancy as more than just reproduction. More rituals? Lyra asked. More celebrations, Logan corrected. Ways of honoring the connection between parents and a child. Between families and communities. The evening evolved into an impromptu cultural exchange, with Dr. Johnson sharing various Terran traditions, while Lyra compared them to her own species' more pragmatic approaches. The contrast was striking, where Terrans celebrated each milestone with ceremony and emotion, the Azure Worlders typically viewed pregnancy as a purely biological process, to be monitored and managed. Your people throw parties just to reveal the child's gender? Lyra asked incredulously. And others bring gifts months before the birth. Baby showers, Jax confirmed. It's about community support, showing the parents they're not alone. Terrans are strange, Lyra declared, but her tone held affection rather than criticism. You turn every aspect of reproduction into an opportunity for emotional connection. Speaking of strange Terran customs, Dr. Johnson interjected, have you considered a traditional Terra wedding? It might help bridge the cultural gap between your communities. The suggestion hung in the air, loaded with implications. Marriage was another concept the Azure Worlders found puzzling, the idea of formally binding oneself to another being for emotional rather than practical reasons. A ceremony, celebrating our pair bond? Lyra considered the idea, her diplomatic mind working through the possibilities. It would give the scientists something new to study, at least. Is that the only reason you'd consider it? Jax asked softly. Lyra's argent eyes met his, full of emotions her species claimed not to possess. No, she admitted. I find myself increasingly appreciative of Terran traditions. They may seem strange, but they carry meaning. Like those books about proper reproduction that brought us together. They represent how Terrans make even the most basic biological functions into something more. The station's largest observation deck had been transformed into a fusion of Terra and Azure world aesthetics. Holographic stars danced with traditional Terra flower arrangements, while ceremonial artifacts of both cultures shared space in elegant display. Your Terran wedding traditions are remarkably complex, Ambassador Thrax observed, watching the preparations with poorly concealed fascination. The symbolic exchanges, the ritualistic promises, the communal celebration, all for a simple pair bonding contract. That's precisely what makes it beautiful, responded Dr. Emily Smith, the station's cultural anthropologist. Terrans elevate biological imperatives into art forms. The wedding preparations had become an unexpected catalyst for cultural exchange. Young Azure World diplomats, previously dismissive of Terran emotional displays, found themselves intrigued by the concept of romantic love. The station's archive, where it all began, had seen a surge in requests for Terran relationship literature. Did you see attaché Kira actually crying during the Terran romance holovid screening? Lyra asked Jax as they reviewed wedding plans in their quarters. Her growing belly now sported a subtle shimmer, a unique trait of their hybrid child. She claimed it was a medical condition, but I know better. Jax smiled, remembering how he'd first met Lyra in that very archive. Your people are beginning to understand that emotion isn't a weakness. More than that, Lyra replied, her argent eyes sparkling with mischief. They're starting to envy it. Yesterday, I caught 2 junior diplomats practicing Terran-style kissing behind the botanical gardens. The news made Jax laugh. Should we add a kissing tutorial to the wedding ceremony? Don't tempt me, Lyra purred, moving closer, though I must admit, your Terran methods of physical affection have their merits. Their intimate moment was interrupted by a chime announcing Ambassador Thrax's arrival. The ambassador had undergone his own evolution, his initial skepticism about Terran emotional practices gradually shifting to cautious appreciation. The Science Council has reviewed the latest data, he announced without preamble. The emotional bonding practices you Terrans employ appear to have measurable biological effects. We've detected increased hormonal harmony and genetic stability in couples who adopt your methods of intimacy. Jax and Lyra exchanged knowing looks. Their relationship had become a sort of unofficial experiment in Terran-alien cultural integration, with surprising results. Furthermore, he continued, several Azure World couples have requested permission to incorporate Terran bonding rituals into their own reproduction protocols. It's causing quite a stir in the scientific community. You mean they want to fall in love? Jax asked, unable to resist. The ambassador's skin darkened slightly. They wish to explore the potential benefits of emotional investment in pair bonding, purely for scientific purposes, of course. Later that evening, during a private moment in the station's arboretum, Lyra reflected on the changes their relationship had sparked. When I first found that book in your archive, I thought Terrans were absurdly complicated about reproduction. Now look at us. We're starting a revolution. A revolution of love? Jack suggested, earning a playful swat. Don't be dramatic, Lyra chided, though her skin glowed with that special phosphorescence that betrayed her emotions. Though I must admit, your Terran approach to relationships has merit. All those books and manuals I once found so amusing, they're really about connection, aren't they? About making something meaningful out of biological imperatives. Their wedding ceremony, scheduled for the following week, had evolved into something unprecedented. Traditional Terra vows would be combined with Azure World energy-binding rituals. The station's various alien species had contributed their own cultural elements, turning the event into a celebration of unity across biological barriers. The Science Council wants to document everything, Lyra mentioned, scrolling through her diplomatic communications. They're particularly interested in the Terran custom of honeymoon periods. Apparently, the concept of ritualistic isolation for new pairs has potential applications in genetic optimization. Leave it to your people to make a romantic getaway sound clinical, Jax teased. Well, Lyra replied, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper, perhaps we should conduct some thorough research of our own, for science, of course. Their laughter echoed through the arboretum, a sound that would have once been considered inappropriate for an Azure World diplomat. But things were changing. The strange Terran books about proper reproduction had sparked something unexpected, a cultural revolution that celebrated the merger of logic and emotion, of biological imperative and romantic love. The wedding ceremony became a historic moment in interspecies relations. The observation deck sparkled with a blend of traditional Terra decorations and Azure World energy patterns, while representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness this unprecedented union. Jack stood at the ceremonial arch, wearing a traditional Terra tuxedo modified with elegant cyan accents that complemented his bride's natural coloring. When Lyra appeared, a collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. Her wedding gown combined Terra white with her people's traditional azure hues, creating an ethereal effect that seemed to capture the essence of their unique union. Your heart rate has increased by 30%, Lyra whispered teasingly as she reached him, her argent eyes sparkling with mischief. Just like that first day in the archive. The ceremony itself became a beautiful demonstration of cultural fusion. Traditional Terra vows merged seamlessly with Azure World energy-binding rituals, while their hybrid child made its presence known through occasional shimmers of light visible through Lyra's gown. Ambassador Thrax, officiating the ceremony, had prepared a speech that captured the historic significance of the moment. What began with a Terran book about reproduction, he announced, has evolved into something far more significant. We are witnessing not just the union of two beings, but the birth of a new understanding between our peoples. During the reception, Dr. Johnson shared the latest findings about their hybrid child. The fetus shows remarkable development, he explained excitedly. It appears to have inherited both Terran emotional capacity and Azure World energy manipulation abilities. The implications are extraordinary. In other words, Lyra translated for the gathered guests, our child will be able to both feel emotions deeply and make their skin glow when they're happy, rather like their mother has learned to do. The comment drew knowing chuckles from the crowd. Lyra's increasing emotional expressiveness had become something of a legend among the station's inhabitants, particularly the way her skin now glowed with that distinctive phosphorescence whenever she was near Jax. Later that evening, during their first dance as a married couple, Jax noticed several young Azure World couples attempting to mimic the intimate Terran dancing style, much to the mixed amusement and scandal of their elders. Your Terran customs are proving quite infectious, Lyra observed, her body perfectly aligned with his in the dance. I overheard two junior scientists discussing the possibility of writing their own manual about proper interspecies reproduction techniques, complete with chapters on emotional bonding. Jax teased back. Naturally. Though I doubt they will capture the full essence of the experience. Her argent eyes met his with an intensity that made his breath catch. Some things can't be documented, even in the most detailed human manuals. The honeymoon suite had been specially prepared with both Terra and Azure World comfort features. As they entered, Lyra's skin began to glow with that now familiar phosphorescence, creating patterns that seemed to dance in response to her emotions. The Science Council wants to study this phenomenon, she admitted, watching the light play across her skin. They're fascinated by how Terran emotional practices have affected my biology. And what do you think about that? Jax asked, drawing her close. I think, she replied thoughtfully, that Terrans might be onto something with their strange obsession with documenting and studying reproduction, though perhaps some aspects are better learned through practical application. Their intimate moment was briefly interrupted by a message from Dr. Johnson, announcing that their child's latest scan had revealed new developments. The hybrid fetus was showing signs of both Terran emotional centers and Azure World energy manipulation organs developing in perfect harmony. It seems our child will truly be a bridge between our peoples, Lyra mused, her hand resting on her growing belly. A living testament to the value of both Terran emotion and Azure World pragmatism. And to think, Jax added, it all started with a book about proper reproduction techniques. Terrans are strange, Lyra agreed, echoing her first impression from that day in the archive, but I'm beginning to think that's exactly what makes you wonderful. The station's night cycle created a perfect backdrop for their first evening as a married couple, the stars visible through the observation window seeming to dance in celebration of their union. Their love had not only created new life, but had sparked a cultural revolution that promised to reshape the future of Terran-alien relations. The medical bay erupted in a mixture of Terran cheers and Azure World energy pulses as Lyra gave birth to their son. The baby boy emerged with skin that shifted between Terran tones and his mother's Azure hue, while his eyes already showed the argent intensity characteristic of the Azure World species. Remarkable! Dr. Johnson exclaimed, monitoring the infant's vital signs. Perfect fusion of both species' characteristics. And look, he's already manifesting energy patterns. Indeed, the newborn's skin rippled with phosphorescent waves, responding to his first experience of life outside the womb. Jax held Lyra's hand, watching in wonder as their son demonstrated this unique trait. He's beautiful, Jax whispered, his voice thick with emotion. What shall we name him? Lyra smiled tiredly, her own skin glowing with maternal pride. In my culture, we name children after the energy patterns they first manifest. Looking at his, I would say, Nuxis. It means dancing starlight in our ancient tongue. Nixis corvus, Jax tested the name, watching as their son's skin flickered in response. Perfect. Ambassador Thrax, who had insisted on being present for this historic birth, approached the family with uncharacteristic emotion showing on his features. The first viable Terran Azure World hybrid, conceived through traditional means, and displaying characteristics of both species. The implications are extraordinary. He's not an experiment, Ambassador, Jax reminded him gently, but without heat. The months of pregnancy had helped forge an understanding between them. No, Thrax agreed, watching as Nixis instinctively reached for his mother's glowing skin. He's something far more important. He's proof that our species can truly connect, on the deepest level. The following days brought a stream of visitors, both official and personal. The station's archive, where it all began, had set up a special display chronicling Jax and Lyra's story, featuring that fateful book about Terran reproduction techniques prominently. Your son is already causing quite a stir in scientific circles, Dr. Smith reported during one visit. His ability to manifest both Terran emotional responses and Azure World energy patterns is unprecedented. Several research institutions have requested permission to study him. They'll have to wait, Lyra declared firmly, cradling Nixis as he practiced making patterns with his skin. Our son needs time to just be a child first. Jax watched them from his position by the window, marveling at how naturally Lyra had adapted to Terran concepts of family and emotional bonding. Her own skin now frequently synchronized with her son's energy patterns, creating beautiful light shows that delighted both species observers. The Science Council is particularly interested in how he develops, both physically and emotionally, Ambassador Thrax mentioned during an official visit. They believe understanding his development could help other couples achieve similar success. Perhaps we should write a new manual, Lyra suggested playfully, her argent eyes meeting Jax's across the room. The Comprehensive Guide to Interspecies Romance and Reproduction, a personal journey, complete with practical examples. Jax teased her back. The human influence remains strong on you, cultural attaché. Thrax observed, more amusement in his tone than criticism. Indeed it seems so. Nixis grew quickly, displaying a fascinating blend of both species' traits. His skin could shift between Terran and Azure World tones at will, while his emotional capacity seemed enhanced by his ability to express feelings through energy patterns. He's going to be quite the heartbreaker, Dr. Johnson joked during a checkup, watching as Nixis charmed the medical staff with his unique abilities, both literally and figuratively, considering how his energy patterns affected sensitive equipment. Just like his mother, Jax replied, earning a loving energy pulse from Lyra. Their quarters had been modified to accommodate both species' needs, creating a perfect environment for their hybrid child. The walls now featured both traditional Terran art and Azure World energy displays, while the nursery combined Terra's comfort with alien technology. "Sometimes I still can't believe how this all started," Lyra mused one evening, watching Nyxus sleep peacefully in his crib, his skin gently pulsing with dream-induced patterns. "One curious question about a strange Terran book, and now look at us." "Are you saying Terrans aren't strange anymore?" Jax asked, pulling her close. "Oh, you're still strange," she assured him, her skin beginning to glow with that special phosphorescence reserved just for him, "but I wouldn't have it any other way." 5 years after that fateful day in the archive, Jax stood in the newly expanded cultural center, watching his son, Nyxus, demonstrate his unique abilities to a fascinated audience of both Terrans and aliens. The boy's skin shifted through a rainbow of colors as he projected elaborate energy patterns, while simultaneously expressing very Terran emotions. "And this is how I feel when Daddy reads me stories," Nyxus explained, creating a spectacular display of warmth and joy that had the Azure World scientists frantically taking notes. Lyra appeared beside Jax, her own skin glowing with maternal pride. "He certainly inherited your gift for public speaking," she murmured, leaning into him. Their physical connection still sparked the same energy patterns in her skin as it had on their first intimate encounter. "And your diplomatic skills," Jax replied, watching as their son expertly fielded questions from both species, "though I'm not sure either of us can take credit for his unique abilities." The cultural center had evolved into an interspecies research facility, with their original archive serving as its heart. That first book about Terran reproduction techniques now occupied a place of honor in a special display case, alongside documentation of their groundbreaking relationship and Nyxus's unprecedented development. "Ambassador Thrax has proposed establishing an interspecies cultural exchange program," Lyra announced, her argent eyes sparkling with excitement, "with us as the primary advisors, teaching other species about the benefits of Terran emotional practices." Jax grinned. "How far we've come from you thinking Terrans were strange for documenting reproduction." Their intimate moment was interrupted by Nyxus bouncing over, his skin pulsing with excitement. "Mom. Dad. I just discovered I can create new patterns. Watch this." The display that followed left both parents breathless. Their son had somehow combined Terran emotional expression with Azure World energy manipulation in ways neither species had thought possible. "Extraordinary," Dr. Johnson commented, approaching with his ever-present scanner. "He's not just manifesting existing patterns, he's creating new ones, based on emotional responses we didn't even know could be expressed through energy." The demonstration attracted more attention, including several young couples from both species who had been inspired by Jax and Lyra's success story. The station had become something of a pilgrimage site for those hoping to achieve similar interspecies connections. Later that evening, in their private quarters, Lyra and Jax watched their son sleep, his skin gently pulsing with dream patterns that told stories of both his Terran and alien heritage. "The Science Council wants to publish our complete story," Lyra mentioned, her fingers intertwined with Jax's, "including all the intimate details of how we achieved successful reproduction." "Everything?" Jax raised an eyebrow, remembering their passionate journey of discovery. "Well, perhaps not everything," Lyra smiled, her skin beginning to glow with that special phosphorescence that still made his heart race. "Some things should remain private, even in the name of science." Their son stirred in his sleep, projecting a pattern they'd come to recognize as contentment. The sight reminded them of how their unlikely romance had transformed not just their lives, but the understanding between their species. "I've been thinking," Lyra said softly, "about writing my own book, not just about reproduction, but about how Terrans taught me to see biological functions as something more, as opportunities for connection, for growth, for love." "Terrans are strange, a love story," Jax suggested teasingly. "More like, how Terran strangeness changed the galaxy," she corrected, pulling him closer. "After all, it was your species' peculiar obsession with documenting and studying reproduction that brought us together." Their intimate moment was briefly interrupted by a pulse of energy from Nyxus's room, their son unconsciously responding to their emotional connection. They'd learned to balance their passion with parental responsibility, finding new depth in their relationship as they raised their extraordinary child. "The station's governing council has approved our proposal," Jax revealed, watching the stars through their viewport. "We're officially establishing the first interspecies family support center, a place where others like us can find guidance and understanding. Complete with a library of Terran relationship manuals, Lyra added, her voice full of warmth. Among other resources, he agreed, drawing her into his arms, though I still think the best learning comes from practical experience. Their love had sparked a revolution in interspecies relations, proving that biological differences could be bridged by emotional connections. Their son represented the future, a perfect blend of logic and emotion, of physical and energy-based life, of Terran passion and Azure precision. As they stood together, watching the stars and holding each other close, Lyra's skin began to pulse with that unique pattern that belonged only to Jax. Terrans are still strange, she whispered, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And Azure Worlders are still fascinating, he replied, feeling the energy pattern sink between them, especially when they learn to embrace Terran strangeness. Their story had come full circle, from a chance encounter over a book about reproduction, to a love that transformed two species' understanding of connection. As their son slept peacefully nearby, his dreams creating new patterns of possibility, they knew that their greatest adventure was still unfolding.